নমস্কার, শুভ সকাল। দেখুন, আমি ইংরেজিতে উপন্যাস লিখেছি বেশি, কিন্তু বাংলাতেও লিখেছি। কাজী ঋষিকেশ বাবুর কাছে আমি অনুমতি নিয়ে আপাতত একটু ইংরেজিতে বলি, কেমন? When Monu invited me to this festival, for me it was like a prodigal son coming home. Because my mother grew up in Artgod, which was then in the Cuttack district. And of course, she was fluent in Oriya. And then, of course, she moved with her parents to Kolkata when she was still very young. And unfortunately, I could not acquire this wonderful language, the language of Oriya, from her. It has been my loss. You know, this is the season for literary festivals. Literary festivals are being held in many, many cities all around India. And as I was flying in from Jaipur last night, having attended the Jaipur Literary Festival, I was asking myself a question which I want to test your patience with this morning. Does literature matter? Does literature matter? And as a corollary to that, do literary festivals matter? As we begin the second decade of the 21st century, many influential voices around the world are saying literature is irrelevant. There are now better ways to understand the depth and the breadth of the human condition. And by that they mean news, commentary, facts, and a whole host of things. They believe that there is now direct access to our experiences, direct access to human experiences, our thoughts, our opinions, our views, through the internet, the social media, and the like, which are much superior to the subtle and subterranean ways of literature, the subtle and subterranean approaches of literature. Okay? And therefore, the conclusion is, literature is becoming obsolete. And the more radical voices are saying, literature is already dead. Now, if one were to take this perspective, then it raises the question, what is the value of meetings such as this? Okay? And if a whole range of critics who are also quite stridently critical of literary festivals, and many of them believe that an event like this is really an insider's forum, an insider's conversation including authors, publishers, would-be authors, newspaper journalists, and perhaps a few interested readers. Okay. There are criticisms that say that these literary festivals are really methods for establishing literary hierarchy. Who are the important authors of today? Who are the medium-tier authors of today? Who are the irrelevant authors of today, or insignificant authors of today? There are those who say literary festivals are nothing but celebrity parades, where people come in to take autographs and now increasingly selfies with authors. And more fundamentally, that these literary festivals are no longer drawing from the young who have found other more attractive pastimes. Now, in my 60-odd years as a reader and 20-odd years as an author, I've never heard these voices denouncing literature as strongly as I do now. So the question is, are they true? Is really literature irrelevant? So let us move away from this debate for a moment and address some of the points that have already been raised by the dais. Let's talk about the world that we live in. As Monu was saying early on, there's a war raging in this world, in Europe. Okay? A war which has seen death and destruction, a war which is bringing us to the brink of a nuclear holocaust. The pandemic, and the pandemic has been referenced to already, has laid bare the sharp divisions between the rich and the poor in this world, between the haves and the have-nots, poverty, unemployment, and lack of development in this world. We are faced with a catastrophic climate crisis. You know, the Amazon rainforest has lost 70% of its tree cover in less than a decade. Okay? And if this was not enough, we are faced with an environment of great intolerance, of great hatred in every different part of the world, directed mostly towards minorities. Demonization of minorities, victimization of minorities, and oppression of minorities. I could talk about the Uyghurs of China. I could talk about the Palestinians of Gaza. But I'd rather talk about my country, India. You know, I grew up in this nation. And when we were young, as many of you about my age or close to my age would know, there were differences of opinion. Political parties fought at the hustings, newspaper columnists wrote against each other, and in the tea shops and canteens in schools, yards, and in college campuses, we fought for all different kinds of perspectives, political perspectives, ideological perspectives that we hold. But never before in my life have I seen the outpouring of hate that we see every day today on media, on social media, which has created a wound through the heart of our nation. It does not matter which side of an ideological debate you belong in. It does not matter which party you voted for in the last election or you're likely to vote for in the next election. The damage has been done. Today, we are far more suspicious of each other, fellow citizens, far more distrusting of fellow citizens than at least I have ever seen before. And war, climate catastrophe, the pandemic, and intolerance is fed by what? It's fed by arguments, it's fed by political ideologies, and by so-called facts. And for every argument that we hear today, there's a counter-argument. For every political brand that one adopts, there's a counter-brand of politics. And for every fact that we are exposed to, there's a counter-fact or a fake fact. So it saddens me to say, I'm an academic in my other life, and I've spent my 40-year career as an academic in the world of the intellect. But it saddens me to say that we have reached the end of arguments. We have stretched arguments as far as they would go. It is no longer possible for me to be convinced by my opponent's arguments, and it's impossible for me to convince my opponents, whoever they might be, with my arguments. Arguments have become noise in our world. So what is the role of literature? Indeed, literature and all of the arts, the literary arts, the performing arts, and the visual arts, have the unique power, the unique capability to bypass the logjam of the mind, and appeal directly to the heart. As Spinoza once said, he wrote, "Reason cannot defeat emotion. Arguments cannot defeat emotion." Therein lies the power of literature and all of the arts. That it is able to evoke, the successful works are able to evoke a kind of emotion within us that allows us to go beyond the world of arguments that we are engulfed in, the world of ideologies that we are engulfed in, the world of television noise that we are engulfed in. Okay. It is able to address the complexities of the human condition, not necessarily provide facts about the human condition, but the complexities of the human condition like nothing else does. And it does so without taking sides. Just think about this great novel, Dr. Zhivago, by Boris Pasternak. What a grand sweep of Russian history it was, from the Tsarist times to the Bolshevik Revolution to the Second World War. Dr. Yuri Zhivago did not take sides. He lived in the currents, as we all do as human beings, in the currents of history. And by reading Pasternak, we develop a more complex, a more nuanced understanding of the Russian heart, which perhaps would let us understand the atrocities that are being performed by some Russians in the name of their nation. Only literature can act as a messenger for peace in our troubled times, a messenger for peace. Monu quoted Ernest Hemingway in his opening remarks, and I was immediately reminded of the dog-eared paperback which my father, my publisher father, I was very fortunate. I had an author mother and a publisher father. I grew up in a house surrounded with books. And my father lent me this dog-eared paperback, Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls. And the line that I will never forget as long as I have memory is, "Ask not for whom the bell tolls, for it tolls for thee." Okay. And today the time has come for us to say, ask not for whom the bell tolls. Ask not who is sent to jail on charges of treason. Ask not who is lynched, because it tolls for you too. The funeral bells toll for you too. So literature can act as a messenger for peace. But equally, literature can act as an agent of resistance. Okay. I was just speaking in Jaipur about my new novel, and I said along these lines that what do you see, what do you do when you encounter violence? Violence on the streets, violence on campuses, wherever. What do you do when you encounter violence? Okay. If you encounter violence with violence, then violence wins. Okay. And the only way to encounter violence is by encountering it through the arts. The arts can act as an act of resistance. And I'm going to just cite one example. Donald Wood wrote this book called Biko in 1978. A book called Biko. In 1978, when South Africa was enmeshed in the horrors of apartheid. In 1987, Richard Attenborough made a film called Cry Freedom based on Biko. And in 1991, apartheid was abolished. In the 1980s, we lived in America, and I distinctly remember that on the opening day of Cry Freedom, my wife and I, we went to see the film. And at the end of the film, both black and white audiences rose with tears in their eyes when Peter Gabriel sang, "Biko, Biko, Biko." What a great victory for literature. A victory without bloodshed. A victory which was based on the understanding of the human condition. Okay. And so, literature thrives. Literature is not irrelevant. Literature is not worthless. But perhaps it is the only savior in a world that desperately needs to be saved. And as its torchbearers, the literary festivals are our great big hopes. So thank you, Monu, for holding this wonderful festival and allowing me to be a small little part of it. Namaskar.